In this episode, we talk about why a senior Indian diplomat was stopped from entering a Gurdwara in Scotland. We also tell you the remarkable story of a 14-year-old boy being rescued at sea. But first, we talk about the census. Hi, I'm Rahel Philipose, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. Last month, when both houses of parliament passed the Women's Reservation Bill, the focus of the conversation extended beyond just women's rights and quotas. As it turned out, the census and its delay were also brought under the spotlight. And this was because the bill is intricately linked to the contentious delimitation exercise, which involves the process of redrawing constituencies. Now, this process hinges on the completion of the census, which was originally scheduled for 2021, but got postponed due to the pandemic. Now, this delay has been raising concerns among policymakers. Many fear that it will not only distort our understanding of the country, but will also have a negative impact on some of the most vulnerable sections of our population. To understand how this delay is affecting us and the significance of the census, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's Udit Misra in this segment.
Udit, why don't we begin with the basics? Tell us, why do we need the census?
Yeah, so the whole point of a census is that, you get an exact detail, exact picture of the country, right down to the last granular detail. Because, the census happens once in every 10 years. And during that 10-year period, all of us tend to work with a lot of estimates. We tend to work with a lot of guesses about who we are, what are we as a country, what's happening to our country. But census is an opportunity to get exact granular details. And that is the real thing. Because at a macro level, you could say that in a decade, India's population could be within one range, of population estimate. And you can make certain assumptions based on that, and you would perhaps be right. But you may not necessarily know about a particular village or a particular district in a particular state, what change they went through. Because at a macro level, the numbers may be smoothened. They may be ballpark, you may get them right. But it is in the micro details, it's at the ground level where things change quite dramatically. There'll be districts which will see massive outmigration. There'll be districts which will see massive inward migration. There'll be states which will do very well, areas which will do very well, other areas which will get more impoverished. Climate change might be affecting some areas. People's lives might be changing quite dramatically in different parts of the country. So the whole point of a census is not to get a macro picture. Yes, macro picture emerges, but the real benefit of a census is knowing the granular details and to be able to say that I know that in a particular taluka of a particular district, in a particular state, so many people are unemployed or so many people are disabled, to know exactly who is who, because that is where the policy actually gets implemented. Anything that we say or do gets implemented at the local level. So that is the real benefit of the census.
And Udit, whatever we're trying to get out of the census, is it not possible for us to get it through other means, say data collected by government departments, for example?
Yes. So, census is a costly business. We know from 2019 that the government said that the census 2021, if it had happened, would have cost us around 9,000 crores. So one could question that, why not do away with the census, or can we get this information from somebody else? And typically the first place would be to look at government statistics and see if we can just make do with that. But there are 2-3 problems with using government statistics. One is that often government statistics may miss out a lot of people. For example, migrant population, right? If the population itself is moving, then the government statistics or a policy or a scheme data may not capture it because they by design are missing them. So the most needy people will be missed out. That is one. Secondly, there is a question mark on whether government statistics are really good and robust, in the sense that typically the norm has been that government departments would always claim that they have done very well or they have reached out and achieved their targets. Then comes the census, and the census gives a reality check. But if we just focus on the government statistics, there will be no reality check. So it's really difficult to just imagine that you can go about making proper policies based on the existing government policies, because existing government policies typically emerged out of knowing the census, out of knowing the reality. You cannot keep that reality hidden and then just go by the response. The response might need tweaking, and which will never happen unless we have actual granular data.
And Udit, we understand that the census was supposed to take place in 2021, but then it got delayed because of COVID. Talk about the kind of problems a delay like this causes.
So there are many problems. One is that, census is the foundation for the whole data and statistical system of the country, which is to say that when we talk about samples, when we make those guesses during the decade, saying that we are likely to be like this, or we draw a sample. Suppose you and I go out and say, let's make a representative sample. What do we mean by representative sample? We mean something that closely resembles the picture that came out from the last census. So it's the basic benchmark for data. Now, if you do not have timely census or regular census, the reality may change and you may keep doing your sample surveys trying to represent a reality which has already shifted. So that's a very massive thing. And this represents this shows up in different ways. For example, rural urban population or migration trends, all of that may change. So imagine a scenario where maybe one state has done something that attracts labor from another state. Now, in a decade, a lot of labor might be moving, but your sample surveys will not represent, you will not capture that reality, and almost by design miss it because you are still looking at the original census or the last census to understand what is the framework of our population or migration.
So because of a delay, or in cases where a census does not take place, we don't get a clear understanding of what changes have happened in the last 10 years and what has and has not worked in terms of policy implementation.
Yes, exactly. So policy is another thing. For example, a very apt example that is being given is the National Food Security Act. Now, National Food Security Act says that we will give 66% of India's population guarantee of food, subsidized food. But that ratio is pegged to the population of 2011 census. Now, between 2011 census and 2021 census, population has moved, or even today, population is increasing every year. The beneficiaries could have gone up by some estimates by as much as 100 million, right? But those 100 million people cannot be given by law what they should get by law because the census hasn't happened. You haven't identified, you haven't even acknowledged that so many people are in the beneficiary net. So those kind of problems happen because you do not have updated census details.
So what you're saying is that even right now, there could be potential beneficiaries of government schemes that are basically being left out, that are not able to avail benefits they deserve.
That is true. Kids that are born in poverty after 2011, and a lot of kids are born in India, they will not be formally recognized as beneficiaries under the National Food Security Act. So these kind of problems will happen, or people who fell into that category after the 2011 census. In the piece that I wrote, we gave the example of a woman who lost her husband and becomes a widow and then cannot get included in the National Food Security Act until the next census happens, until somebody then comes around and acknowledges that, yes, you are now a beneficiary. So those kind of problems happen.
And right now we've been talking about how the public and essentially the weakest sections of the population are getting affected by this delay. But does a delay in census also affect the private sector? Does it affect private companies?
Yes, absolutely. The private sector, it operates in an economy where it depends on census, again, for being the benchmark, providing details about which part of the economy is doing well, where is the market. So if you wanted to sell your product, you must know where is the consumption happening, where is the demand for different things. And those details come through in a census, even to know what are the potential gaps. So for example, whether enough two-wheelers are being sold or not. If that number is low, then you know that there is a potential here to grow, or how many cars are being sold, or if the rate of purchase has slowed down or increased, at what level. So, even the private sector requires data to make its own decisions, its strategic decisions on where to invest, where to sell. And all of that ultimately depend on the census. Insurance companies, they make their assessments based on census data. So the whole sector depends on the fundamental data that census provides. You can make other projections, but based on that census. And once you do not have that, all the calculation across the board go awry. It becomes more costly for private sector to get that detail by doing their own surveys, which might be bigger, might be more costlier, more time taking, all of that.
And next we talk about an incident in Glasgow. Last week, during a visit to Scotland's Glasgow, the Indian High Commissioner to the UK, Vikram Doraiswamy, had his car intercepted by 3 individuals from the British Sikh community. Doraiswamy was in Glasgow to engage with local authorities, university students, the diaspora, and members of Scottish society.
One of the engagements that he had included his visit to a Gurdwara in Glasgow.
That was the Indian Express's diplomacy editor, Shubhajit Roy.
When he reached there on Friday, his car actually just came on the driveway. Then a couple of British Sikhs, they tried to open the door and they were shouting slogans on Khalistan. So it turned out that they were not members or residents of that area, but they had come to essentially block the entry or disrupt his presence in the Gurdwara. So the Indian High Commissioner and the Vikram Doraiswamy and another diplomat who was the Consul General in there. So both of them were in the car, but they didn't step out. They sensed that these couple of people were trying to prevent his entry into the Gurdwara. So they turned around, their car turned around and they went back.
Now, this incident has raised concerns regarding the safety of Indian diplomats in foreign countries and also prompted the Indian High Commission to address the issue with the British Foreign Office.
Indian High Commission issued a statement saying that they also had informed the police as well as had taken it up with the British Foreign Office, the UK Foreign Office, because it dealt with the safety and security of the Indian diplomats, because the Indian High Commissioner was involved in this case. So therefore, he raised this issue and the High Commission raised this issue with the authorities. Indian High Commission also called this incident disgraceful and asked the British authorities, the UK authorities to give protection to its diplomats stationed in the UK.
Here, it is crucial to note that this incident comes at a time when India and Canada are already embroiled in a dispute concerning the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a pro-Khalistan leader based in Canada. Just last month, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau alleged that the Indian government had a hand in Nijjar's murder, a claim that India vehemently rejected, dismissing it as absurd and motivated. To know more about the issue, my colleague Utsa Sarmin speaks to Shubhajit in this segment.
So Shubhajit, the concerns that this incident has raised are not new in the UK, right? Earlier this year, some people had vandalized the Indian High Commission in London, and that also prompted concerns about the security of Indian diplomats. So do we know how the UK responded to the earlier incident?
Actually, UK has a significant Sikh diaspora, and there also, like Canada, the Khalistan issue has been an issue between the two countries. When the Indian High Commission was vandalized, and if you remember, an Indian flag was, one of the pro-Khalistan protesters, activists, he had climbed up the balcony of the Indian High Commission in London and tried to bring down the Indian flag. At that point of time, also, the Indian High Commission had raised the issue with the UK authorities and asked for more security outside the High Commission. After that, I understand that the security has been beefed up outside the Indian High Commission.
Right, and you mentioned that, like Canada, the Khalistani movement impacts India's relationship with the UK as well. So could you explain how India and UK have responded to this issue?
Yeah, so essentially, because of the large number of Sikh diaspora present in the UK, that issue has played out in the recent years as well. And UK also has a peculiar situation where the British Pakistani community is quite active there. And we've seen the tension between the Indian community and the Pakistani community play out there as well. So somewhere, the Indian government believes that the Khalistan movement or these protests have been supported or have got some kind of a tacit, overt or covert support from the Pakistani community, Pakistani elements. So that has complicated the relationship sometimes between India and UK over the Khalistan issue. And although the two governments have tried to resolve this, but again, in UK, as in the other Western countries, there is a strong freedom of speech argument that is made where the British authorities, UK authorities invariably tell their Indian counterparts that it's under freedom of speech, these protests are allowed and all of that. But obviously the Indian side makes the argument that, when it endangers or risks the life or the interests of Indian High Commission, then the freedom of speech argument doesn't work. So essentially that has been a constant conversation between India and UK over the last few years. And that's how the Khalistani issue has played out. And in fact, after the spat with Canada, this is the first time that the Khalistan issue resurfaced in the UK.
Right, and speaking of Canada, the last time we spoke to you about this, the relationship between the two countries was already quite strained, with India stopping visa services for the Canadian nationals. And now, yesterday we saw reports of India asking 41 Canadian diplomats to leave the country by 10th of October. So could you tell us why India chose to do this?
So it had said that it will ask the Canadian government to reduce its diplomatic strength, diplomatic presence in India, since it believes that there are more Canadian diplomats in India than there are Indian diplomats in Canada. As of now, we know that there are about 20 Indian diplomats in Canada, whereas there are about 60 Canadian diplomats in India spread across the country in about 12 offices. India has only 3 offices, one Indian High Commission in Ottawa and 2 consulates. So obviously there is a mismatch or a disparity in the strength in the diplomatic presence. So the Indian government has now told them that we have 20 diplomats in your country, whereas Canadians, you guys have about 60 diplomats. So 40 diplomats have to go back. So to bring a parity, an equal number of diplomats. So that's what has happened now as a follow-up to the earlier intention or decision by Indian government to bring parity in their diplomatic strength. So now these Canadian diplomats have been given a week's time to get back to their home country.
And Shubhajit, what kind of impact will this latest decision have on people or India-Canada ties, which has already deteriorated considerably?
So one of the direct impact of reduction of Canadian diplomatic staff or diplomatic strength in India will be that when you reduce strength, then obviously the services will be affected. And one of the services that is likely to be affected or impacted will be the visa services. So as you know, there are about 3 lakh Indian students who go to Canada to study. About 4 lakh Indian professionals go there to work or on business visas or work visas or even seek permanent residence there, or even people go to meet their families on tourist visa. So all these visa services are in lakhs and there is reduction in the staff strength. So there will be shortage of staff strength. So that would mean visa processing times will become higher. So the queues and the processing times will become higher. So that would in fact impact the Indian students or Indians wanting to go to Canada for either education or for work or to visit their families. So that would be the next level of impact. And as we now see that, this diplomatic tit for tat response or that kind of escalation is still on. And so far, there is no resolution in sight. But we'll have to see how this plays out and where does it go.
And finally, we talk about the remarkable rescue of a 14-year-old boy lost at sea. Last week, Lakhan Devi Pujak had gone to Surat's Duman's beach for what was meant to be a fun family picnic by the sea. However, tragedy struck while the teenager was playing with his younger brother Karan. The Indian Express's Kamal Saiyed tells us what happened.
So Lakhan and Karan went for a swim into a small sea coast area, beach area, where Karan lost his balance and Lakhan pulled him up to the shores so that he can be saved. Suddenly, a big tide turned up and it swept Lakhan back deep into the sea.
So, like Kamal mentioned, Lakhan was trying to rescue his 12-year-old brother when he got pulled into the sea himself. Soon after, his grandmother, who was with him at the time, cried out for help. Kamal said that a few youths entered the water but were unable to locate him.
So Lakhan's grandmother and local people, they immediately informed this Dumas police station and Surat Municipal Corporation Fire Brigade. So the fire department team, along with local people who carried out a hunt into the sea on the boats, but eventually they could not find him late in the evening. So he got lost into the water and went deeper into around 10 to 12 nautical miles deep into the Arabian Sea.
And as the hours passed by, Lakhan's family began to lose hope. In fact, when Kamal spoke to Lakhan's maternal uncle Vikas, he mentioned that they were prepared for the worst.
They have lost hope that he may have died, and they were just waiting for his body to come afloat on the shore so that they can carry out final rites.
But the next day, the family received information that Lakhan had been rescued. At about 3 p.m., approximately 26 hours after Lakhan had been dragged into the sea, Rasik Tandel, a fisherman from Bhatt village in Navsari district, spotted a young boy clinging to the remains of a wooden plank used to support a Ganesh idol. Kamal tells us how Lakhan managed to survive for more than a day without food or water.
Simply, he left his body as it is and kept his face on the top of the surface water outside so that he can slowly control his breathing.
As the time progressed, Lakhan found himself being drawn deeper and deeper into the ocean. Later that night, he spotted a large ship coming his way, but he was unable to catch its attention. Around the same time, he also happened to spot a big wooden plank drifting towards him.
So he first tried to climb on the boat, but it got drenched into the water. So he was struggling. And finally, after half an hour of his attempt, he was successful in getting on the board and making it float in the drift in the direction of the wind and waves.
And as he climbed atop the plank of wood, a sliver of hope returned. He continued to float across the ocean, waiting to be rescued. Throughout the night, Lakhan thought about his family and the day that had passed.
While he was getting sleep, he used to sleep only for 5 minutes and then again wake up. So this continued for some time. So he was just passing a time. So in the morning, when sunrise turned up, he also found himself searching for some hope or some vessel or praying to the God that somebody should come up and rescue him.
The next afternoon, he spotted fisherman Rasik Tandel's boat.
Rasik Tandel was shocked to see a boy in the deep sea no man area with only on a wooden plank surviving. So Rasik Tandel he prayed to the God for that boy's survival, and he threw the wooden rope on him and told him to catch it and pull, and slowly Rasik Tandel pulled the rope towards the boat and the boy was rescued.
Rasik provided the boy with water, a fresh pair of clothes and a blanket. Later, the Marine Police were alerted, and earlier this week, Lakhan was finally reunited with his family. Kamal describes what unfolded at the Surat port when the young boy saw his family.
He first immediately rushed to his mother and hugged her deeply. He told his parents that even though anything may happen, he kept courage for his survival. So after meeting his parents, everybody were in shock after seeing Lakhan for the first time. So the police immediately took him to the Nirali hospital at Navsari, where he was being treated by the medical doctors and psychologists, and he was kept under observation for around a day.
Soon after he was welcomed back, his friends, family and the local Devi Puja community organized a procession to celebrate his return. Kamal says that the local BJP leadership also made it a point to felicitate not just Lakhan, but also the fisherman who rescued him.
the state BJP president, C.R. Patil, he came to know about the news of this incident. He rushed to the hospital. So he met the boy and pacified him and told him not to worry. And he basically general meeting with the boy. And the boy was not in a conscious state to talk to him. Then later on, the former state tribal minister Naresh Patel and BJP MLA from Gandevi constituency, he met Rasik Tandel, Durga ship owner and pilot. So he congratulated and felicitated it at Dholai port, where Rasik Tandel and all his 6 crew members were there. And similarly, while coming in Surat, the BJP MLA from Surat West, Punish Modi, he also felicitated this boy, Lakhan, for his bravery and keeping the courage for his survival.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. It was written and produced by me, Rahel Philipose, Utsa, Sarmin and Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.